Your hands stopped working properly 3 winters ago. Not all at once. That would have been almost merciful. No, they went slowly. The way everything goes when you're 71 years old, and you've spent 50 of those years gripping iron, hauling coal, feeding furnaces that wanted to eat you alive. The knuckles swelled first, then the fingers curved slightly inward, like they were trying to make a fist they could never quite close. Then the cold got into the joints and stayed there, permanent as a tenant who knows he has nowhere else to go. You wake up every morning now and you flex your hands under the blanket before you do anything else. Testing, checking the damage. Some mornings they open reasonably well and you feel something close to relief. Other mornings, the wet ones, the below freezing ones, they feel like someone has packed the knuckle joints with gravel overnight, and you lie there in the dark, pressing them against your chest, trying to warm them back into something useful. This is your first act every day in the winter of 1879. Not prayer, not gratitude, hands. Because without the hands there is no work, and without the work there is, well, you know what there is. You've watched enough men find out. Before we go any further, I should tell you what this story is actually about. It's not a story about suffering exactly, though there's suffering in it. It's not a story about failure, though that's in here too. It's a story about a promise, specifically the great American promise, the one the country has been making to people like you for 100 years, the one that says, work hard, be honest, keep your head down, and you will be taken care of. You believed that promise. You believed it for 50 years. And I need you to understand what it means when a promise like that turns out to be hollow. Not broken the way a dish breaks, quickly, with a clean edge. Hollow the way old wood goes hollow. You don't notice it until one day you put your weight on it, and it collapses under you, and you're falling before you even understood it was happening. That's what old age in 1870s America felt like for the people who built this country with their hands. So let's go there, let's live it. Get comfortable. Here we go. Your name is Elias Whitmore. You were born in 1808 in a farmhouse outside of Lancaster, Pennsylvania, third son of a man who smelled permanently of hay and leather and the iron mineral scent of the well water they drew every morning before the sun came up. Your father's hands were like yours are now, thick, curved, built more for holding than for letting go. You remember watching them as a child with something between admiration and fear. They looked like they could stop a horse. Now it's December of 1879, and you are in Cincinnati, Ohio, in a boarding house on Vine Street that smells of cabbage and lamp oil, and the particular damp of a building that hasn't been properly heated since before the Panic of '73 took the money out of everything. You have $3.14 to your name. The rent is due on the 1st of January. The rent is $2.50. That leaves 64 cents for food for the rest of December, for whatever December decides to throw at you, which this year had been throwing ice. The Mississippi froze solid last January. The Ohio River, your river, the one you've watched from these streets for 22 years, has been threatening to do the same since mid-November. The papers call it the coldest winter in a generation. The papers are run by men who have offices with stoves in them, and houses with furnaces, and wives who make sure there is hot food on the table at regular intervals. You note this without bitterness. Well, almost without bitterness. The boarding house at 214 Vine Street is run by a woman named Mrs. Eugenia Holt, who is 53 years old and built like someone bolted a shelf to a wall and dared gravity to do something about it. She has grey hair pinned back with no-nonsense efficiency, a face that was probably pretty once and is now mostly just competent, and hands that are red and cracked from the constant work of running a house that shelters 11 people on a budget that wouldn't keep 4 comfortable. She's not unkind to you. This is important. In 1879 in Cincinnati, for a man your age with your circumstances, not unkind is a category of human interaction you've learned to recognize and be grateful for, the way you'd be grateful for a fire that doesn't go out in a storm. It's not warmth, exactly, but it keeps you alive. Mrs. Holt charges you $2.50 a month. This includes the room, a narrow space on the 3rd floor, just wide enough for a cot and a chair and a trunk, and 1 meal per day, which is supper, served at 6 o'clock. No exceptions. No second helpings unless there are genuine leftovers. No waste. She has made the no waste rule extremely clear. The man who boarded here before you tried to take extra bread to his room for the next morning's breakfast, and she looked at him with an expression that apparently conveyed an entire philosophy of survival without a single word. He did not do it again. You have breakfast on your own. You've been eating for the past 3 weeks a combination of cornmeal mush that you cook yourself on the small communal stove in the 2nd floor hallway when someone else isn't using it, and, on better days, an egg or a slice of bread purchased from the market cart that rolls down Vine Street at 7 in the morning. The mush costs almost nothing. The eggs cost 6 cents each, which means you eat them once a week on good weeks, and not at all on bad ones. Today is a bad one. The light through your window when you finally manage to sit upright, after the hand flexing, after the 10 minutes of lying still while your hips remember how to work, after the slow archaeology of finding your will to move, is the flat grey of a December morning that has no intention of getting any brighter. No sun, just the uniform pewter of clouds that have been sitting over Cincinnati for 2 weeks like a ceiling that forgot to be sky. The cold in this room is immediate and personal. It breathes on you from the walls. It rises from the floor through the thin soles of the shoes you sleep in. Yes, you sleep in your shoes, have for 3 winters now, because the alternative is putting cold shoes onto cold feet every morning, and that particular shock has become something your body simply refuses, and it settles into the places it knows best. The left shoulder, where you took a glancing blow from a falling iron beam in 1854, and where the weather has been reporting ever since. The right knee, which you twisted on an icy dock in 67, and which has remembered the injury with more loyalty than you'd like. The hands, always the hands. You stand up. This takes longer than it should. Your body does a kind of negotiation with itself. The back considers its position, the hips file their objections, the knees register their formal complaint, and eventually all of them agree, reluctantly, to cooperate. You straighten. Not to your full height, which was 5 feet 11 in 1845, but to whatever height you are now, which feels shorter. You've been compressing slowly, the way old iron sometimes does under sustained pressure. The room smells of the previous night's breath, your own, close and stale, and the faint cold metal scent of the wash basin that hasn't had hot water in it since Sunday. There's another smell underneath that, something musty and old that comes from the walls themselves, from the building's long memory of cheap coal and crowded lives and all the people who've lain in this same narrow cot before you. You pull on your coat. It's a black wool coat, still presentable, bought in 1871 when the iron trade was doing well enough that spending $4 on something to keep you warm didn't require 3 days of internal debate. The wool is starting to go thin at the elbows. You've patched the left lining twice with pieces cut from an old shirt. The buttons are mismatched. 2 of the original bone buttons gave up the ghost, and you replaced them with brass ones from a notion shop. But from a distance, in the grey winter light, it still looks like the coat of a man who has his affairs in order. Appearances matter in 1879 America. They matter more than almost anything for a man in your situation. Because the second the coat starts looking like a poor man's coat, you stop being Elias Whitmore, retired iron worker, and you start being something else. Something the city has a word for. Several words, most of them not kind. You take your hat from the nail by the door. Check your pocket. $3.14 in coins, wrapped in a piece of cloth. You go downstairs to make your mush. The communal stove on the second floor is a squat cast iron beast that burns coal when there's coal, and wood when there's wood, and occasionally burns the hope of everyone within range when there's neither. This morning someone has already started a small fire. Probably the German family in the room at the end of the hall, the Bowers, who have 3 children, and therefore more reason than most to get up early and solve the cold problem as quickly as possible. The oldest child, a girl named Lotta who is 7, and has her mother's serious expression, and her father's relentless practicality, is standing near the stove with her hands out to the warmth, watching you with the focused attention of a child who has learned that watching adults carefully tells you useful things about the world. Guten Morgen, you say. It's almost all the German you have, but she smiles at it, which makes the room feel slightly warmer. You set your pot on the stove. Your hands manage the water jug with careful deliberation. The cold has made the grip uncertain, and a dropped jug means a wet floor, and Mrs. Holt's particular silence, which is worse than most people's words. The cornmeal goes in. You stir with the long-handled spoon you've owned since your wife, Margaret, was alive and had opinions about kitchen implements. Margaret. You think about her for a moment. You always think about her when you're cooking, because in 38 years of marriage she was the one who cooked, and now every time you stand at a stove you're aware of the shape of what's missing. She died in the winter of 1877, lung fever. It took her 11 days. You were sitting beside the bed when it happened. December 14th, 4 in the afternoon, the last light of the day coming through the window at an angle that made her face look peaceful, which it was not. And since then you have been navigating a life that was designed for 2 people, with the resources of 1. The mush takes about 8 minutes. You eat it standing at the hallway window, looking down at Vine Street, where the day is beginning its cold, industrious business. You need to understand something about Cincinnati in 1879. This is one of the 10 largest cities in America. Nearly 250,000 people. The Queen City, they call it. The Queen of the West, back when the West was Ohio and Indiana, and the places beyond them were still half rumour. It sits in a valley where 2 rivers meet. The Ohio running broad and brown along the southern edge of town, and Mill Creek, threading up through the industrial districts to the north, and the city rises up from the waterfront in hills and terraces, layer after layer of streets and buildings climbing the slopes, so that on a clear day you can look from the hilltops and see the whole sprawl of it, laid out below you like an argument about progress. Progress, You know about progress. You came to Cincinnati in 1857 from Lancaster by way of Pittsburgh, following the iron trade that was following the railroads that were following money, which always knew where to go before the people did. You were 49 years old. Your eldest son, Thomas, was already here, working at one of the ironworks along the river. He wrote you letters with a kind of determined cheerfulness. Cincinnati is growing fast, father. There's work for everyone. Bring Margaret. Bring yourselves. The city has more future than past, and that's the right way to have it. He was right for a while. The ironworks ran 3 shifts. The Ohio River carried goods in both directions. The city was building bridges, laying gas lines, paving streets that had been dirt since the French had trappers wandering through the region. The Cincinnati, Hamilton, and Dayton Railroad, the Little Miami, the Columbus and Xenia, trains going everywhere, carrying everything, and every rail and rivet and fitting made by men like you, with hands like yours, in furnace heat that could peel the skin off you if you weren't careful. You were careful. You were also paid $1.40 a day when times were good, and $1.10 when they weren't. And during the bad years, and there were bad years, the panics and the pullbacks and the slow bleed of winters when the river froze and shipments stopped, and the foremen walked the floor with their hands in their pockets and their eyes fixed on something in the middle distance that wasn't any of you. During those years you were paid whatever they felt like paying, which could be as low as 75 cents. And if you didn't like it, there were 10 men behind you who'd take the work at 60. You liked it, or you accepted it, which is what liking looks like when the alternative is not eating, and you saved. This is the part of the story that matters. You saved the way people your age and your class understood saving to mean. You put a little money aside every month in a savings account at the Fifth National Bank of Cincinnati, because the whole country was telling you this was the right thing to do. This was the responsible thing. This was how a man of your generation built himself the small, solid floor he would need to stand on when his legs stopped being quite so reliable. By 1873, you had $412 in that account. $412 was, for a man like you, a fortune. Not a rich man's fortune, not a merchant's fortune or a railroad baron's fortune. Nothing that would have impressed anyone at the Queen City Club or the business offices along 4th Street. But a working man's fortune, enough to live on for 2 years without working, enough to see you through, enough to keep a promise to yourself, to Margaret, to the whole silent contract you'd signed with the idea of America. And then September of 1873 happened. The panic. J. Cook and Company, the biggest banking house in the country, the one that had financed the Union through the entire Civil War, closed its doors on September 18th, and the whole financial system of the United States fell over like a drunk trying to find his keys. Banks failed. The stock market shut down for 10 days. Railroads went bankrupt. The iron trade, your trade, the thing that had been your whole life, collapsed so completely and so fast that it felt less like an economic event and more like a sudden new law of nature, like gravity deciding to take a day off and then coming back twice as hard. The Fifth National Bank of Cincinnati, where your $412 sat in a neat entry in a leather ledger, closed in November of 1873. You got back $62. You held the bank notice in your hands. Those hands, the ones that still worked properly then, that could grip a bar of iron and feel the temperature of it through the metal, that could tell the difference between good iron and bad iron by the sound it made when you struck it. You held the notice and you read it twice. and you felt something happen in your chest that wasn't quite grief and wasn't quite rage and was mostly just the quiet, devastating clarity of understanding that the game had different rules than you had been told. That was 6 years ago. The $62 lasted 2 years. Thomas helped when he could. He had his own family by then, his own reduced circumstances, his own calculations of survival. Margaret sold her good silver, the set she'd brought from Lancaster. The depression ground on and on and on. 3 years, 4 years, 5 years of men sleeping in parks, of bread lines stretching around city blocks, of factories standing idle while the men who'd built them stood outside wondering what they'd done wrong. What did you do wrong? You're still not entirely sure. There is work today, or there might be. A man named Horace Pickwick. And yes, you've heard all the Dickens jokes. He's heard them too. He doesn't find them funny. Runs a coal and wood yard on Freeman Street about 9 blocks north. He's not a bad man. He's a businessman, which means he has his own pressures, but he doesn't go out of his way to make your pressures worse, which in 1879 Cincinnati puts him meaningfully above average. He uses you occasionally for loading and delivery work when his regular men are out sick, or when a big order comes in that needs extra hands. The work is loading 50-pound sacks of coal into a 2-wheel cart and then pulling that cart through the streets to wherever the delivery address is, and then unloading the sacks at the other end. It costs you physically more than it probably should at 71. Your back makes its position known by mid-morning. Your hands on the sacks go from cold to painful to something past painful that you've stopped having a word for and just call working. He pays 40 cents for a full day's loading and delivery. You're not going to tell him that 40 cents is not enough, because 40 cents is 40 cents, which is 40 cents more than nothing, and nothing is what you have a great deal of right now. You button your coat, careful with the brass buttons, the holes are getting loose, and you go out into the December morning. The cold hits you like a physical fact, not a metaphor, a fact. The air this morning is somewhere around 12 degrees Fahrenheit, and it has a wind in it that comes off the river and finds every gap in your clothing with the focused determination of something that has been practicing this specific cruelty for centuries. The gap at your left wrist, where the coat cuff has pulled away from the sleeve lining. The place at your collar where the wool doesn't quite meet. The thinned patches at the knees of your trousers. Vine Street in the early morning is a particular kind of alive. The first thing you notice is the sound. Before you can see clearly, before your eyes have adjusted to the grey outdoor light after the lamplight of the stairwell, your ears are already processing the city. The clop of horses on cobblestones, each step a small crack of sound that bounces between the building facades. The scrape of a shovel somewhere up the block, someone clearing ice from their front step, a child crying, a door slamming, the distant rumble of something heavy moving. Wagons, probably, or the iron-wheeled drays that carry goods down from the railhead to the river wharves. And underneath all of it, the smell. Cincinnati in 1879 smells like coal smoke primarily. Not the clean cold smell of outdoor air, but the heavy particulate burn of a city that heats itself and powers itself and cooks itself on soft coal. The cheap kind, the kind that leaves a residue on everything it touches. Your lungs have been filtering this air for 22 years, and they've made their peace with it, more or less, though in the cold months you can feel them making the extra effort. Under the coal smoke, horses. Several hundred horses work the streets of Cincinnati daily, and they make their presence known in multiple sensory registers. the warmth rising off their sides when you pass close enough, the sweet acrid smell, the particular sound of shod hooves on different surfaces, sharp on cobblestone, muffled on packed dirt, a kind of complaining scrape on ice. Under the horses, food drifting from the places that are already open. A bakery on 7th Street puts out its early loaves around 6, and the smell of bread, real bread, not your cornmeal compromise, travels half a block in the cold air and does something to your stomach that feels like cruelty dressed up as comfort. You walk north. Your gait has changed in the past 2 years, and you are aware of this awareness, if that makes sense. You notice yourself noticing that you walk differently now, slower, more deliberate with each step on the icy patches. Once you could have walked these streets at a pace that made younger men look up from whatever they were doing. You were not fast, but you were relentless. The way machines are relentless. The way furnaces keep burning without drama or complaint, and people who didn't know you mistook the relentlessness for youth, for energy, for something it wasn't. Now you're careful. Careful is its own kind of dignity, you've decided. A man who falls on the ice in December in Cincinnati at 71, alone, a man like that is one broken hip from a category of problem that he won't survive. You know this with the calm, practical certainty of someone who has watched it happen twice. Old Harrison, who used to board at this same house, fell on Plum Street last February. He was in the hospital for 6 weeks. He came out and went directly to the county farm because there was no coming back from 6 weeks of no earnings at his age and in his circumstances. So, careful, each step planned, weight distributed, eyes on the ground. The Freeman Street coal yard doesn't look like much from the outside. A wooden fence with a gate, a painted sign that the weather has reduced to near illegibility, a smell of coal dust that you can detect half a block away, mineral and dry and somehow colder than the regular cold. Inside the fence, ordered rows of coal in different grades, small mountains of it, black against the grey morning, wood stacked along the far fence, cord wood, split and kindling in smaller piles, a lean-to with a scale and a counter. Horace Pickwick is behind the counter when you come through the gate. He's in his 50s, stocky, red-faced in the way of men who spend a great deal of time outdoors in all weathers, with a bristle of grey-brown whiskers and eyes that are permanently narrowed against the wind. Whitmore. Morning, Horace. Cold enough for you? It is a question that does not require an answer. You give him a nod that covers it. I've got a delivery to Sycamore Hill, he says, not looking up from the ledger he's writing in. 400 weight to a Mrs. Addington on Auburn Avenue. She pays ahead, so no collecting, just the drop. Can you do 400 weight today? 400 weight is 8 50-pound sacks. That's 8 sacks onto the cart and then up the hill to Auburn Avenue, and then 8 sacks off the cart and into whatever coal cellar Mrs. Addington has, and then the cart back down again. Your hands already know what this will cost them. I can do it, you say. 40 cents. Same as always. Same as always. He looks up at you then, briefly, and there's something in his expression. Not pity exactly. Something more complicated than pity. And then he looks back at his ledger. Cart's out back. Loading starts now if you want to be up there and back before dark. You load 8 50-pound sacks of coal onto the wooden cart by yourself. This is the part of the story I need you to actually feel, not just understand. Each sack is rough burlap, stiff with cold, the weave gritty against your palms. You can't grip them the way you used to. The fingers don't close properly in this temperature, so you use your forearms as much as your hands, levering each sack off the ground and onto your hip before heaving it up and over the cart's side. The coal shifts inside the burlap when you lift it, a dense sliding weight that changes your centre of balance at the worst possible moment, and you have to compensate with your legs, which are doing their own negotiation with the frozen ground. The first sack, manageable. The second, your back registers the request formally. The third, your left shoulder, the one with the 1854 injury, contributes its opinion. By the fifth sack, you have found the rhythm of it, the way you always did, your body remembering muscle by muscle what it knows how to do even when it would prefer not to. The coal smell is everywhere now, in your nose and on your hands and on the front of your coat, where you've leaned each sack against it. Coal dust on your face, fine as soot. Your breath coming visible in the cold air, each exhale a small proof that the engine is still running. The seventh sack. You pause, not because you need to stop, because you need to not fall over, which is a different thing. You stand with your hands on your knees, the coal cart in front of you, 6 sacks already in it, the 7th in your arms, and you breathe for 15 seconds. Just breathe. The cold air goes into your lungs and comes back warm and visible. A horse in the yard next to you snorts and shifts against its tether. A sparrow lands on the fence, looks at you with the uncomplicated assessment of something that has no stake in your situation, and flies away. 15 seconds, you stand up, 7th sack goes in, 8th sack, done. The hill is the problem. Cincinnati is full of hills. This is one of the city's most notable geographic facts, and also, for anyone hauling anything heavy, its most notable inconvenience. The city was built in a valley and then climbed out of it in every direction, and the streets that climb the hills are steep enough in summer and actively hostile in winter, when the ice makes every uphill step a negotiation, and every downhill step a potential disaster. Auburn Avenue is on Sycamore Hill, which rises about 300 feet above the river valley floor. 300 feet doesn't sound like much. It is in fact a great deal when you're pulling a loaded 2-wheel cart. You strap into the harness, it goes across your chest and shoulders like a mule's traces, because that is functionally what you are, and you start up the hill. The cart wants to go back down. The cart is 400 pounds of coal and 20 pounds of wooden cart, and it is absolutely clear about its preferences. You lean into the harness, your boot soles slip on a patch of ice, and you throw your weight forward and grab the cart handles and hang there for a moment, half bent, arms locked, legs scrambling, until the slip passes and the friction returns and you can breathe again. You will not think about what a fall would mean. You think about the incline instead, about putting one foot in front of the other, about the harness across your chest and the way you can feel your heart beat through it, solid and fast, which at least means the thing is still working. About the way the cold air starts to feel slightly warmer when you're working this hard, your body generating heat against the temperature like an argument against the elements. About Margaret briefly. She used to bring you a glass of water when you came home from a hard day, before you even sat down. Not from sentiment, but from efficiency. She'd decided that a man who'd been working that hard needed water first and sitting second, and she was right. And you miss it with a specific bodily ache that is different from the ache in your back, but is in the same neighbourhood of feeling. The hill, 1 foot, another foot. Auburn Avenue is a different country. This is not a figure of speech. You've crossed maybe 15 city blocks from Horace Pickwick's coal yard, but you have crossed something more fundamental than geography. The houses up here are set back from the street behind low iron fences, and they're large, not mansions exactly, not the great palaces of the industrial titans who live farther east on Grand Inn Road, but substantial, 2 and 3 stories, real brick, not the cheap common brick of the neighbourhoods below. Gas lamps on the street posts, sidewalks that are shovelled because someone has been paid to shovel them. You can smell the difference almost. Up here the coal smoke from the houses is cleaner, better coal, the kind Horace keeps at the higher end of his price scale, the anthracite that burns hotter and cleaner than the soft stuff you shovel into the boarding house stove. There's a smell of wood polish from somewhere, and somewhere else the faint ghost of a breakfast that involved ham, which is the smell of a morning that is proceeding with complete unconcern about money. You find Mrs. Addington's house, a 3-story brick with green shutters and a side gate that leads to the coal cellar door, and you unload the 8 sacks. You do not meet Mrs. Addington. You see a face at an upstairs window briefly, and then it withdraws. You're not the kind of visitor that windows are opened for. The coal cellar has a wooden chute. You open each sack and pour the coal down. The sound it makes, the small black lumps rushing and tumbling and piling up in the darkness below, is the sound of warmth, of a house that will stay warm for the rest of the month without a single thought from the people inside it. 400 pounds of coal, carefully loaded and hauled up a hill by a 71-year-old man, will be shovelled into a furnace by someone else, and will heat these high-ceilinged rooms to a temperature that will allow Mrs. Addington and whoever lives with her to wear light clothing indoors, to be comfortable, to sleep in rooms that don't slowly freeze around them. You close the cellar door, you take the cart back down the hill, you're careful on the way down. By the time you get back to Freeman Street, your hands have stopped hurting in the immediate specific way, and have started hurting in the deeper, ambient way that will be with you for the rest of the day. Your back has made its formal protest and is now in the sullen phase that follows formal protest. Your feet, in boots that were good once and are now held together by a combination of cobbler's work and determination, are wet at the left heel where the soul has developed an opinion about seams. Horace Pickwick counts out your 40 cents without ceremony. 4 dimes placed in your palm. You close your fingers around them. More tomorrow? You ask. He looks at his ledger. Maybe. I'll know tonight. Come by in the morning. I'll come by. You put the coins in the cloth wrap with your other coins. $3.54 now. The rent is $2.50. That leaves $1.04. December has 11 days left. $1.04 for 11 days. You are not, you should understand, a man prone to self-pity. This isn't something you cultivated particularly. You were not raised to make decisions about how much sympathy you deserved, and then mete it out accordingly. You were raised to work and to be decent and to not complain about the things that couldn't be changed. These were the values your father demonstrated by example rather than by instruction, the way most real values get passed on, and they have served you, in the sense that they kept you functional for 7 decades, which is a kind of service. But standing on Freeman Street in December of 1879 with 40 cents you've just earned by pulling 400 pounds of coal up a hill, you do sometimes allow yourself to ask a quiet private question about the nature of the deal you were offered. You worked for 50 years. You paid for the house. Well, you helped Margaret pay for the house. The small frame house on McMicken Avenue they'd owned from 1859 to 1875, When the inability to keep up the mortgage payments finally caught up with them, you paid your taxes, you served in the militia in 1862, too old for the regular army but useful enough for home guard work. You saved your money in a bank that the government did not think needed watching. You were, in every measurable way, the kind of American citizen the country said it wanted you to be. And here is where you end up. You don't say this to anyone. It's not the kind of thing you say in 1879 in public. There are institutions for people who say too loudly that the arrangement isn't fair. There are words for people like that. Labour agitators, socialists, troublemakers, the kind of men who march and shout and end up in the newspapers and then somehow also end up in the county jail. You're not that kind of man, but you think it. In the private room behind your own eyes where nobody gets to audit you, you think it. The afternoon wants something to do with itself, and you give it errands. The market on 5th Street runs until 3 in the afternoon on weekdays. You go, not because you have much to spend, but because markets in 1,879 cities are one of the few free entertainments available to a man in your circumstances, and because sometimes at the end of the day, the vendors will sell off perishables cheap rather than carry them home. The 5th Street Market is a long covered building, open on the sides, where several dozen vendors sell food, dry goods and livestock on a rotating schedule. On Tuesdays and Fridays it's the full market. Today is Tuesday, which means you push through the entrance into a world that hits every sense simultaneously. The smell first, raw meat, cold and iron bright, from the butcher stalls on the north side. Under that, fish, the Ohio River fish that the German fishermen bring in, pike and catfish and the occasional great ugly carp. Under that, apples and root vegetables, the last of the fall produce being sold at winter prices. Straw on the floor, damp from people's boots. Horses at the hitching posts outside breathing visible clouds into the cold air. The sound. Dozens of conversations in 3 languages, because Cincinnati is a German city as much as it's an English one. Nearly a third of the population is German-born or German-descended, and the market reflects this. English, German, and occasionally the Irish of the South End workers who've come up to buy their week's provisions. Under the conversation, the whack of a cleaver on a butcher's block, the squeal of something being weighed on a hanging scale, a woman arguing with a vendor about the quality of his onions in German with the conviction of someone who has been personally wronged by inferior produce. You move through the market with the slow, deliberate movement of someone who has nothing to do but be there. The butcher has soup bones today, the knuckle bones that yield collagen and flavour when you boil them but not much actual meat. He's selling them for 2 cents each. You buy one. It will make a soup tonight or tomorrow, stretched with water and whatever vegetables you can find. 2 cents. A vegetable woman has turnips, gone slightly soft, selling for a penny apiece. You buy 2. You look at the bread. The bread is 6 cents a loaf, which is within your mathematical range but outside your practical range if the 11 days ahead are going to be navigable. You don't buy bread. You stand at the edge of the market and you watch. The people here are not mostly people like you. That's what you notice if you watch carefully. There are the housewives of the skilled working class, the wives of the cabinet makers and the plumbers, and the men who drive the streetcar horses. Women who are poor by some standards and comfortable by others, who have enough to buy what they need and occasionally what they want. They move through the market with a practical, focused energy, picking up a cabbage, inspecting a cut of pork, making decisions with the calm efficiency of people who know exactly what they're spending and why. There are the wives and cook women of the better houses, women in better coats, moving with a different quality of confidence. They have lists. Their coats have good buttons. When they handle the vegetables, they do so with the air of someone who can afford to be selective, which is the most obvious class marker of all, the freedom to say no. And then there are people like you, the older men who move slowly and buy small amounts, the women whose coats are mended too many times in too many visible places, the children who come in alone, without parents, to buy single items with coins counted out in advance at home. These are the people navigating what $1.04 looks like across 11 days, and you recognize them the way you'd recognize your own reflection. Not because you look the same on the outside necessarily, but because of the quality of attention they're paying, the way their eyes calculate without looking like they're calculating, the way they touch a price of something and set it back down with a specific kind of steadiness that is practiced not to look like disappointment. You recognize them. You're one of them. At the end of the market, near the side exit that lets out onto Race Street, there's a man you know. Or knew. You know him from the ironworks. He's younger than you by 15 years or so. His name is Vernon Beauchamp, and he worked in the casting department at the same yard where you spent the last years of your employment. You last saw him in 1876, when the ironworks cut another round of workers, and both of you were in that round. He's standing outside the market now, not going in, leaning against the building with his hands in his coat pockets and his face turned towards something you can't see from where you are. He's thinner than you remember. Vernon, he looks up. There's a half second where you can see him calibrating, deciding something, and then his face arranges itself into the expression of a man who is fine. "Whitmore, it's been a while." "3 years, you say. How are you keeping?" "Oh, well enough. Can't complain." The response of a man who is complaining internally, very specifically. You know better than to press. You know what "well enough can't complain" means in December of 1879. You've been saying it yourself. But he's thinner. His coat is worse than yours. "You workin', you ask?" Because it's the question. The only real question. The one all conversation eventually arrives at. "I did some loading at the riverfront last month. Grain work. The cold slowed it down." A pause. "You?" "Coal delivery today. Little here and there." "Little here and there?" He nods. He knows exactly what little here and there means. "You still on Vine Street? That Holt place?" Still there. He's quiet for a moment, looking at the ground. "I heard," he starts, and then stops. Starts again. "I heard the county's taking applications at the relief office on 5th for the Christmas distribution." The Christmas distribution. Relief. You feel your jaw tighten. It's not a decision exactly. It's a physical response, the way a body has to certain words that carry more weight than their syllables suggest. "What kind of distribution?" you say, carefully, neutrally. "Basics. Coal, bread, maybe some meat." They give vouchers. He's looking at you now, and there's something in his eyes. Not pity. He has too much dignity for pity, but a kind of solidarity. We are in the same place. We are both talking around the same word. You have to go in person, fill out a form. Who runs it? The Associated Charities and some of the churches. The Associated Charities of Cincinnati. You've heard of them. Most people in your circumstances have heard of them. They are organized about 5 years ago. The city's way of centralizing the various private relief efforts into a single coordinated system, which sounds efficient and probably is from the administrative side of things. From the other side, the side where you are. The Associated Charities means a building where you walk in and explain your situation to a person behind a desk, and they write down what you tell them, and then they decide if you deserve help. They call the people who do this the friendly visitors, women mostly from the better parts of town who come to investigate the circumstances of the poor and determine who is the worthy poor and who is not. This distinction, worthy and unworthy, is the great moral technology of 1879 American charity. The worthy poor are the ones who got poor through circumstances beyond their control. Widows, orphans, the suddenly unemployed. People who are fine until something happened to them. The unworthy poor, the drunkards, the idle, the people who could work but won't, the people who spent what they had on the wrong things, the people who made bad choices. These are the ones who don't deserve help, and helping them only makes things worse, because it removes the incentive for them to improve themselves. This is the theory. The practice is that a friendly visitor from the better parts of town comes to your room and looks at your belongings and asks you questions about your drinking habits and your family and your employment history. And then she makes a judgment about what category of poor you are. You are 71 years old. You have lived a specific, accountable life. You have never been drunk in any way that interfered with work or family. You have no remaining family in this city. Thomas moved to Kansas City in 1877, following work, the way people do, the way you yourself once did. You have a room on Vine Street and $3.54 and 40 years of ironworking in your hands, and the thought of explaining all of this to a friendly visitor, of laying it out in the terms they'd require, of being assessed and categorized and filed. I'll think about it, you say. Vernon Beauchamp nods. I went last week, he says, quietly. They were decent about it. A pause. Not comfortable, but decent. This is coming from Vernon Beauchamp, who is proud in the way that men who've worked hard for their pride are proud, a real thing to say. I'll think about it, you say again. You walk back to Vine Street with your soup bone and your turnips. The cold has gotten into the wet spot at your left heel, and it's gone past cold into something that's just numbness, which is almost preferable. There are 11 people in Mrs. Holt's boarding house, including Mrs. Holt. You know most of them the way you know anyone in close quarters, not well, but thoroughly. Not the interior of their thoughts, but the exterior of their habits. The sounds their shoes make on the stairs, the times they use the hallway stove, the rhythm of their breathing through walls that don't provide much acoustic separation. The Bowers, Otto, who is 38 and works at one of the soap factories in Cuminsville, and his wife Hildegard, and their 3 children, Lotte, Emmerich, and the baby, whose name you still don't know, but who contributes meaningfully to the acoustic environment of the second floor. They are the youngest family here, the most crowded, taking up 2 rooms that cost together what one room used to cost before the panic. Otto works 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, and brings home $4.50. He gives Mrs. Holt 3 of those dollars, and they live on the rest. The arithmetic of this is apparent in their dinner portions and in the children's coats. On the second floor, across from the Bowers, is a woman named Delia Marsh. She's 64 years old, a widow, and she takes in sewing. She's been taking in sewing since her husband died in 1869, and her eyes have the particular squint of someone who's been doing fine detailed work in inadequate light for 10 years. She can sew a buttonhole you wouldn't be ashamed to show to God. She makes about $1.50 a week on good weeks. She eats very little. You've never seen her without a project in her lap. needles going with a quick, automatic precision, her mind somewhere entirely different from her hands. Below you, on the second floor but at the back, is a man named George Stiles. George Stiles is the problem. Not a problem he creates deliberately. Not a problem of character, really. George Stiles is 68 years old, and he has been sick since September. Nobody knows exactly what's wrong with him. Not a doctor, certainly not any of the residents who share this house and listen to him cough through the walls and floor. He was a carpenter's labourer. He did heavy work until his body simply stopped being able to do heavy work. He has been in this house for 4 years, and in those 4 years his circumstances have moved, steadily and without drama, in one direction. He coughs every night, sometimes for an hour. Sometimes you lie awake listening to it and doing the math that you're not unkind enough to say out loud. The math about the winter and the cold and the weight the man has lost since September. You've brought him soup twice. Once in October, once in November. The October soup was from a rabbit you'd been lucky enough to buy cheaply at the market. The November soup was from a bone not much different from the one you bought today. He thanked you both times in the specific way of a man who is not accustomed to being taken care of and doesn't quite know what to do with it. Supper at Mrs. Holt's is served in the kitchen at the back of the first floor, at a table that seats 8 and has 11 people crowded around it on mismatched chairs. The extra 3, usually you, Delia Marsh, and whichever of the Bower children is being disciplined, take their bowls and stand at the counter or sit on the stairs outside the kitchen door. Tonight it's bean soup. Real beans, dried, soaked since yesterday, cooked long enough that they've gone soft and slightly starchy in the broth. There's a ham bone in there. You can smell the pork, faint but real, and some onion, and something herby that might be the last of a dried bunch from Mrs. Holt's shelf. It is, as usual, enough. Not luxurious. Not the kind of meal that makes you think about food afterward with anything like pleasure, but enough. A full bowl of something hot that has protein in it, and warmth in it, and the quality of having been made by someone who knows how to stretch ingredients without losing the soul of the thing. You eat standing at the counter. Lotta Bower has chosen to stand at the counter tonight too, with the solemn focus of a 7-year-old who has been given a real task, holding her own bowl without spilling, and you eat side by side in a comfortable silence. Colt, she says. Cold. Yes, you say. Mama says it will snow more. Your mama's probably right. She considers this, scoops up beans with methodical care. My papa says if it gets colder they might stop the factory. She says it with the neutral flatness of a child reporting information she doesn't yet have the context to understand. He says that happened before. It can happen, you say, when it gets very cold. She looks at you with her father's eyes. What do you do, she asks, if the work stops? You look at her for a moment. 7 years old. The question is genuine. You find other work, you say, or you get by until the work starts again. How do you get by? You think about your $3.54, about Vernon Beauchamp and the relief office on 5th. Carefully, you say. She nods, satisfied. This answer makes sense to her. After supper, you bring a bowl to George Stiles. This is not something Mrs. Holt has asked you to do. She feeds the residents supper. What happens after supper is not formally her business. But you've been doing this since October, and by now it's just a fact, a small regular item in the ledger of how this building functions. You knock. His voice, when he says "come in," is thinner than it was 3 months ago. The room smells of the long occupation of someone who can't open windows in cold weather and whose body is engaged in a project it wasn't designed to sustain. George Stiles is sitting up in bed with a quilt around his shoulders that Delia Marsh made for him. You know it's hers because of the pattern, a kind of interlocking diamond in browns and greys that are very Delia. Practical colours, chosen because they were available, not because they were beautiful. He takes the soup. Don't have to do this, he says. I know. He eats. You pull the chair from the corner and sit. This is the routine. He eats and you sit, not necessarily talking, just the company of two men who are dealing with the same winter in different ways. Cold's getting into the wall, he says, gesturing at the exterior wall of his room. Can feel it. You can see what he means. There's a faint visible seam of frost where the wall meets the baseboard, which means the insulation has failed or was never adequate, which means the cold outside is conducting straight through to the inside. Tell Mrs. Holt, you say. She knows. She said she'd have someone look at it. He says this without rancour. He doesn't expect it to be fixed quickly. A silence. He finishes the soup. Whitmore, he says. The county farm. He says it the way you'd say the name of a place everyone knows and nobody says out loud if they can help it. You ever been? Seen it? Driven past. I went out there in '76, when they first took my brother-in-law. A pause. It's not, they feed you, and you're warm. They have stoves. Another pause. But you can't leave, not easily, and everyone there knows why you're there. You don't say anything. I'm not saying I'm going, he says quickly. Just thinking about it. The county farm, officially the Hamilton County Infirmary and Poor Farm, is about 6 miles north of the city, on a property of about 200 acres. It's where the county sends the people who can't maintain themselves. The old, the sick, the mentally unwell. The people whose circumstances have narrowed to the point where they have no remaining path except to become a ward of the county. There are about 300 people living there. You're not going there. This is not a reasonable position exactly. It's more of a conviction, which is different from a position in that it doesn't respond well to argument. You are not going to the county farm. You made this decision at some point in the last 2 years without exactly knowing you were making it, and now it sits in you like a structural element, something the rest of your daily functioning is built on. You will find other work. You will manage the money differently. You will... something. The something is not yet clear, but it exists somewhere ahead, in the shape of a tomorrow that is better than today in a specific, practical way. It's an option, you say to George Stiles, carefully. It's an option, he agrees. You take the empty bowl back downstairs. Mrs. Holt is washing dishes in the kitchen, her back to you. She hears you come in. He eat it, she asks. All of it. She nods, hands in the wash water. Good, she says, and that's everything. On Wednesday morning, Horace Pickwick doesn't have work for you. He tells you this without ceremony, which you appreciate. No performance of regret, no elaboration. He just opens his ledger, runs his finger down the column, shakes his head. Nothing today, Whitmore. Maybe Friday. Maybe Friday, you say. Come by. You walk back south with your hands in your pockets and your breath making small white signals in the air. The cold today is absolute. Not the 12 degrees of yesterday, but something closer to 4 or 5. A cold that has an edge to it, a quality of commitment, like weather that has decided to stop negotiating. You're on Central Avenue when you realise you're walking toward the river, not intentionally or not consciously. Your feet have made a decision without consulting the rest of you. And when you surface into full awareness of where you are, you're already 3 blocks from the waterfront, and the decision is essentially made. You walk to the river, the Ohio, in December. You've stood here hundreds of times over 22 years, and it has never been exactly the same twice. Today the river is moving fast, the cold hasn't slowed it, the mid-channel current is dark and quick, and the surface is a kind of beaten pewter, the same colour as the sky, so that where the water meets the horizon it's hard to tell which is which. Ice has formed along both banks, irregular shelves of it extending 8 or 10 feet from the shore, grey-white and rough. The smell off the water is mineral and cold and ancient in a way that city smells never are. River smell is older than cities. It predates everything you know. On the far bank, Kentucky. The Kentucky hills, brown and bare in winter, rolling back from the river into the distance. You look at the mills. There are ironworks along the river. Some of them are still working, running at reduced capacity, their furnace smoke going straight up in the cold windless air as fat grey columns. Others are shut. The big yard where you spent 15 years is shut, has been since 1875. The buildings are still there, the brick shells of the furnace houses and the rolling mills, but the gates are padlocked, and the windows that aren't boarded are broken, and the whole thing has the specific silence of a building that has forgotten it was ever loud. You worked in there for 15 years, 6 days a week, 52 weeks a year, minus the sick days and the weather shutdowns. Roughly 50 weeks times 6 days times 15 years is 4,500 days. 4,500 days of iron. The furnaces in there ran at about 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. You wore leather aprons and heavy gloves and still came home some days with burns you didn't notice getting. Because at that heat and that proximity, you stopped fully registering your own body as a separate thing from the work. Your skin toughened. Your eyes adapted to the light of open furnaces the way eyes adapt to anything they're confronted with consistently enough. You could hold a length of iron with tongs and feel through the tongs, through the metal, into the iron. The way musicians talk about feeling through the instrument, that building, those doors, that specific silence. You stand at the river fence for about 10 minutes, not doing anything, just looking. Then you turn around and walk back up the hill, because standing at a shuttered ironworks in the cold is not going to get you to January with your rent paid and $1 in your pocket. This is a good moment to tell you something about the economic reality of being old and poor in 1879 America, and why it was different from being old and poor in most other places and times. The difference was the promise. America had a very specific promise, one that was genuinely American, genuinely new, different from the old world arrangement where your circumstances were largely a function of what your father's circumstances were. The American promise said, it doesn't matter where you start, it matters what you do. Work hard, build a life, and the life you build will hold. And in the early decades of the 19th century, for many men in many places, this was close enough to true to be believed. Farms could be homesteaded, trades could be learned. Cities were growing fast enough that a capable man with a useful skill could find work and keep it for decades. What the promise didn't account for, what the promise was structurally unable to account for, because to do so would have undermined its own premise, was the end. What happens when you're too old to work? In England, the old answer was the parish system. Local churches and local governments took care of their own poor, with a bureaucratic heartlessness that was at least systematic. In Germany, Bismarck was, in the very year you're living through, beginning to build the first modern social insurance system in the world. Old age pensions, accident insurance, the beginnings of the welfare state. America had none of this. America had the family. You were supposed to have children, and the children were supposed to take you in when you got old. And this arrangement was supposed to solve the problem. For many people, it did. If you had children who were prosperous enough to help, if they weren't too far away, if the relationship was intact, if they had room, then yes, the family solved the problem. But if the children were in Kansas City, struggling themselves, in a country that was still recovering from the worst economic depression in its short history, if your wife was gone, if you had nobody left in this city who was connected to you by blood or obligation, then you had the county farm, or you had 40 cents a day when the work came, and $3.54 in a cloth wrap in your coat pocket. And you had your hands and whatever they still had left in them. Thursday morning, you go to the relief office. You don't decide to go exactly. The decision happens the way the walk to the river happened, while you're occupied with something else. Your body making up its mind before your pride gets a vote. You wake up at 5:30 before the church bells, lie in the dark doing the hand-flexing ritual, count the coins in the cloth wrap by feel the way a blind man reads, and somewhere in that counting, somewhere between the 11th and 12th coin, the internal argument that has been running since Vernon Beauchamp mentioned the place simply stops. Not because you've resolved it, because 64 cents won't make it to the 1st of January. The math is done. The math has been done for days. You've been refusing to look at it directly the way you'd refuse to look at a burn, as if not looking at it prevents it from being what it is. It is what it is. You eat your mush at the hallway stove. You put on your coat. You check the buttons, still holding the brass ones, the mismatched ones, and you go. The Associated Charities of Cincinnati has its main office on 5th Street, between Race and Elm, in a building that used to be a dry goods store and has been converted with the kind of institutional efficiency that prioritizes function over comfort. The sign above the door is painted in black letters on a whiteboard. Associated Charities, Relief and Investigation. The word investigation appears to have been added later than relief, in slightly smaller letters, but it's there. You stand outside the door for approximately 90 seconds longer than you need to. Inside, a small waiting room, 8 wooden chairs in 2 rows facing a counter. 5 of the chairs are occupied when you come in. 3 women and 2 men, all various ages, all with a quality of stillness that people have when they're performing normalcy in a situation that doesn't feel normal. A woman behind the counter looks up from her papers when the door opens. Help you? I'm here about the Christmas distribution, you say. A man named Beauchamp told me. You'll need to fill out a form and wait to speak with a visitor. She's already reaching under the counter for the form. Name? Elias Whitmore. She writes it down. The form is a sheet of printed paper with lines for full name, age, place of birth, current address, occupation, reason for application, names of family members in the city, names of family members elsewhere, whether you own property, whether you have savings, whether you have debts, whether you have been treated for intemperance. That last item, whether you've been treated for intemperance. You stare at it for a moment. The assumption embedded in the question, the baseline suspicion, that a man your age and circumstances has probably been drinking himself to ruin, and that this is the kind of thing that needs to be established before the charity can decide whether you're worth helping. You write, no. You fill out the rest. It takes about 4 minutes. The occupation line you write, former ironworker, currently day labour. The family members elsewhere line you write, Thomas Whitmore, son, Kansas City, Missouri. The savings line you write, none. The debts line, none. You bring the form back to the counter. Take a seat, she says. One of our visitors will be with you. You sit. The wait is about 30 minutes. In that 30 minutes you watch the other people in the chairs. Nobody makes eye contact. This is apparently understood. You are all here for the same reason. You are all in the same situation. And the social contract of this particular waiting room is that you grant each other the dignity of not acknowledging it. The man next to you has his hat in his hands. He keeps turning it slowly by the brim, a full revolution, then back. He's maybe 45. Big hands, broken nails. A construction worker probably, or was. The two of you do not speak, but you know him. Not personally, but you know the hat turning. You know what it costs to be in this chair and to be turning a hat in your hands and to be waiting to be assessed. The friendly visitor's name is Mrs. Carolyn Aldrich. She is, you'd guess, about 35. She's dressed well, but not extravagantly. A navy wool dress, good quality, and a brooch at the collar that's the kind of brooch someone's mother might have given them. She has a kind face, genuinely kind, not performed kind, and she carries a leather notebook and a pencil. She comes out from a door behind the counter and looks at the waiting room and calls your name. You follow her to a small room off the main office. 2 chairs, a small table. She sits across from you, opens the notebook, smooths your form on the table between you. Mr. Whitmore, thank you for coming in. Thank you for seeing me, you say. Correctly. Correctly in the sense of the required response, the social formula, the way this exchange is supposed to go. I see you've been in Cincinnati since 1857. That's a long time. 22 years. And you were employed at, she reads from the form, the ironworks on the river. When did that employment end? 1875, when the yard closed. And since then you've been doing day labour, loading, hauling, delivery work. You can hear yourself describing it with a care that is not quite pride and not quite apology, something in between. I've been working steadily when the work is there. Of course, she makes a note. And your wife passed in 1877, December. Another note. The pencil moves with a quiet efficiency that you're trying not to watch. You mention a son in Kansas City. Thomas, he has his own family. His situation isn't comfortable. I haven't wanted to. Of course. She says this gently, which is worse than if she said it briskly. Gentleness requires a response, and the response you have available is the one you don't want to give. And you have no other family in the city? No. She looks at you, not unkindly. There's something in her expression. You've seen it before, in the faces of doctors who have news and are deciding how to deliver it. That is doing the calculation your form represents. 71 years old, alone, no savings, no property, day labour, uncertain. Current resources, $3 and change. She doesn't say what the calculation comes to, but you both know what it comes to. The Christmas distribution includes a coal voucher, £25, and a food basket. Bread, dried beans, salt pork. Enough for 2 weeks, approximately. She looks at you steadily. I want to be honest with you, Mr. Whitmore. The distribution addresses the immediate situation. It doesn't address. She pauses, chooses the word. The ongoing situation. I understand that, you say. There are longer-term options. The county infirmary. I'm not interested in the county infirmary, you say. It comes out more plainly than you intended. Not rude, but direct in a way that closes the door on that particular corridor of the conversation. She looks at you for a moment. There's something shifting in her expression, the professional distance moving slightly aside, something more personal showing through for just a second. I have a question, Mr. Whitmore, and you don't have to answer it. You wait. Is there anything, any skill, any work that your hands can still do reliably in this cold? The question is more considered than you expected. You look at your hands, the curved fingers, the knuckles. I can still read and write clearly, you say slowly. I kept the production logs at the ironworks for 12 years. I know weights and measures, and I can calculate loads and inventories without much error. She writes this down. There's a freight company on Broadway that's been looking for someone to keep loading manifests. The pay isn't much, about $1.50 a week, but it's indoors, and it's steady. She looks up. I can't promise it, but I can write a letter of introduction if you'd like me to. You look at her. A letter of introduction. The same thing Thomas wrote in 1857 when he told you to come to Cincinnati. The same mechanism. One person vouching for another person's worth to a third party. That makes the world actually work. Beneath all the forms and the investigations and the chairs in waiting rooms. Yes, you say, I'd like that very much. She writes the letter in about 5 minutes, in a clear and practised hand on the charity stationery. She folds it, writes the name of the freight company on the front, J.B. Hartwell and Sons, Broadway at 3rd, and hands it to you. The distribution, she says, returning to the formal matter, can be collected starting Saturday. You'll receive a voucher today. Thank you, you say. And then, because it's true, and because she made it easier than it should have been, you are decent about this. She looks briefly surprised. I try, she says, and then quietly, you shouldn't have to come here, Mr. Whitmore. Men who did what you did shouldn't have to come here. I hope that's clear. You pick up the letter of introduction and the voucher. It's clear, you say. December passes, not quietly. December in Cincinnati is never quiet. The cold making everything louder. The churches filling for Christmas services. The streets getting a brief, frantic commercial energy in the week before Christmas that fades just as fast as it came. But it passes with the slow, grinding quality of something that requires endurance more than action. On the 23rd, you collect your Christmas distribution basket. Salt pork, dried beans, a loaf of bread, and a coal voucher that you take directly to Horace Pickwick, who exchanges it for 25 pounds of soft coal with the brief professional transaction of men who've understood each other for years. On Christmas itself, Mrs. Holt makes a real meal. She doesn't explain where the money came from. A church donation probably, or her own careful savings. But the table has a roasted chicken on it, and something that might be plum pudding, dense and sweet in a way, that makes everyone at the table go slightly quiet, as if the sweetness requires attention. Lotta Bauer eats hers with the focused reverence of a child cataloguing a significant experience for later. You think about Margaret. You do this every Christmas. It's not grief. Exactly, not anymore. Not the acute thing it was in 1877 and early 1878. It's more like a conversation that you carry on internally, a voice you've preserved well enough to consult on certain occasions. What would she think of this room? Of these people? She'd like the Bowers, you think. She had a German neighbour in Lancaster and spoke well of her for years. She'd have been talking to Delia Marsh about the sewing by now, comparing notes, critiquing each other's technique with the competitive affection of women who respect the same skill. She'd have thought the pudding was too dry. You smile at this. What's funny? Lotta asks from 2 seats down. Nothing, you say. I was just thinking of someone. Who? My wife. She considers this with her characteristic 7-year-old seriousness. Is she here? No. She died. Lotta nods. She's at the age where this information lands cleanly, without the complicated social padding adults put around it. My grandmother died, she says, in Germany, before we came. I'm sorry. Papa says she's in heaven. Probably she is. Lotta looks at the pudding. Do you think your wife is in heaven? You think about Margaret, about the specific, practical intelligence of her, about the way she made decisions, directly, without ornamentation, with a clear-eyed understanding of what was possible and what wasn't. About the 11 days it took her to die, and how she spent those 11 days finishing things. The mending pile, the letters she owed, the organisation of the household accounts so you'd be able to find them afterward. I think, you say, that wherever she is, she's arranged it efficiently. Lotta stares at you for a moment. Then she laughs. A real laugh, uncomplicated. The way children laugh when something is genuinely funny rather than performed funny. The table hears it, and the mood lifts a half step. On December 28th, you go to J.B. Hartwell and Sons Freight on Broadway. The man you speak with is not J.B. Hartwell, who is presumably no longer among the living, but a man named Arthur Sims, who is the operations manager, who is 42 and has the slightly harassed look of someone perpetually trying to move too many things with too few people. He reads Mrs. Aldrich's letter. He looks at you over it. You kept production logs, he says, 12 years, weights, measures, daily output, grade quality, supplier and shipping records. You keep your hands in your lap so the stiffness isn't the first thing he sees. I'm accurate and I'm reliable. I don't miss days except in genuine illness, and I haven't had genuine illness in 2 years. He looks at the letter again. $1.30 a week, he says. Mrs. Aldrich said $1.50. You don't say this. $1.40, you say. He looks up. $1.35, he says. And we see how it goes in January. Done, you say. You start January the 2nd. The Hartwell Freight office is a single large room on the ground floor of a brick building 1 block from the river. It smells of paper and ink and the faint mineral cold smell that comes off the river in winter seeping through the walls. 3 long tables manifest stacked in organised piles, a stove in the corner that is kept hot enough to be genuinely warm, which is a physical experience so different from the boarding house attic that the first morning you almost stand still just to feel it. Your job is simple in description and considerable in execution. Each wagon load of freight that comes through the Hartwell yards needs a manifest, a document recording what was loaded, in what quantities and weights, from what origin to what destination. The men who load the wagons are not always reliable documenters of what they load. They get the large numbers right and the small details wrong, or they write in handwriting that has been described diplomatically as creative. Your job is to sit at a table and receive the manifests from the loaders and check them against the actual orders, and when they don't match, which they frequently don't, you track down the discrepancy. The work is not exciting. The work is, however, warm and dry, and uses the parts of your brain and body that are still working well, rather than the parts that are losing the argument with 71 years of use. On your first day, Arthur Sims watches you work for about half an hour, and then goes back to his own desk and doesn't mention your age again. On your third day, he says, without looking up from his own papers, "You're faster than the last man." You say, "Thank you." This is, coming from Arthur Sims, a thing approximately equivalent to a medal. The $1.35 a week is not enough to solve anything, but it's regular, it's known, it's the difference between the arithmetic of survival being impossible and being merely very tight. You take the job, you keep the job, you go every morning 6 days a week to the warm room on Broadway, and you record what was loaded and where it's going, and you track the discrepancies with patient, methodical care, and the world's freight moves through Cincinnati, and some of the documentation of that movement passes through your hands. It's not what your father's hands were built for. It's not what your hands learned to do. But your hands are still useful, and in January of 1880, in Cincinnati, Ohio, that is not a small thing. George Stiles dies on a Tuesday night in February. You don't know it's happening when it happens. You're asleep. The Hartwell work has regularized your hours, and the regularity has done something beneficial to your sleep, giving it a quality of genuine rest rather than the shallow, interruptible dozing of December. And you're somewhere in the deeper part of the night when you hear the sound. Not the cough, or not only the cough, something else. A sound you can't immediately identify, low and sustained, coming from below your room. You lie still and listen, and it continues, and after about 20 seconds of listening you understand that someone is in distress, and you're putting your feet on the cold floor before you fully complete the thought. Down the stairs, second floor, George Stiles' room. The door isn't latched. You push it and it opens, and the smell hits you first. A change in the smell of the room that you recognize immediately and can't explain how you recognize. Something fundamental shifting in the air, some quality of warmth leaving, the body withdrawing from its occupancy. George Stiles is in his bed. His eyes are closed. His breathing is there, but changed. Long gaps between breaths, each breath a small labour. You go to the side of the bed and you sit on the edge of it and you take his hand. His hand is very cold. He doesn't wake up, doesn't respond to the touch, but some part of you, the part that has sat beside people at this threshold before, beside Margaret, beside your own father in 1849, the part of you that knows this territory registers something relax in him, the infinitesimal acknowledgement of not being alone. You stay. Mrs. Holt comes about 20 minutes later. She must have heard something, or been woken by something. She appears in the doorway in her nightclothes with a lamp, and she takes in the scene, and she comes to stand on the other side of the bed without speaking. The two of you sit with George Stiles while February does its worst outside the window. He dies at about 3 a.m, between one long breath and a longer silence. Mrs. Holt closes his eyes with 2 fingers, with the practiced gentleness of someone who's done this before, and then she sits back in the chair she's pulled to the bedside and folds her hands in her lap. For a while neither of you says anything. The lamp makes a small warm sphere in the cold room. Outside, the February wind pushes against the glass. "He was a decent man," she says finally. He was. He didn't complain. No. A pause. He had a sister in Dayton, she says. I'll have to write. I can write the letter, you say, if you'd like. She looks at you across the bed, across the man lying between you. That's kind, she says. Yes. Thank you. The county buries George Stiles in the potter's field at Spring Grove Cemetery. There is a service, brief, perfunctory, a young minister who didn't know him saying words that are true in the general sense and specific in no sense. Delia Marsh comes. You come. Mrs. Holt comes. The sister from Dayton could not make the journey in February. The grave is in a section of Spring Grove that you've walked past but never been close to before, a stretch of ground near the back fence where the plots are unmarked by stones, just numbered wooden stakes pushed into the earth. 200 people buried here this year already, and it's only February. Old people mostly, the sick, the ones whose circumstances narrowed to the point where the county stepped in. You stand at the edge of the grave, the minister finishes. Delia Marsh, who's maintained the controlled expression of a woman who manages grief privately, lets a single tear run down her face and then efficiently brushes it away with the back of her glove. You think about the wooden stake, stake number 417, which is George Stiles' stake, tells you almost nothing about George Stiles. It doesn't tell you that he was a carpenter's labourer for 30 years and could build a straight wall without a level. It doesn't tell you that he read his Bible every night, the same worn copy, in the light of a single candle, with the focused attention of someone looking for something specific. It doesn't tell you that he thanked you for the soup every single time until the very end without exception. It's a wooden stake. You stand there a minute longer than everyone else, not from sentiment exactly, or not only, from something more precise. The desire to be a witness to a specific man's life in the only way still available to you, which is to stand at his grave and know his name and let that knowing be worth something. George Stiles, carpenter's labourer, born somewhere in Ohio, 1811. Died Cincinnati, February 1880. He didn't complain. You walk back from Spring Grove in the cold, 4 miles roughly. You could take a horse car, there are streetcar lines that go most of the way. But the nickel fare is a nickel, and the walking costs nothing and gives you the thing the walk always gives you, which is the time and the motion to think without thinking. Cincinnati in February. The city goes about its business around you. The freight wagons on Central Avenue, their iron-rimmed wheels grinding on the frozen street surface, each wheel a different note. A schoolboy running, his coat flying behind him, chased by something or running towards something. Either way, the pure animal speed of a body that hasn't yet learned to be careful. A woman on a step shaking a rug with sharp, decisive snaps that send small clouds of dust into the cold air. All of these lives, all of these daily negotiations with existence. You are beginning to understand something about old age in America that you didn't understand at 40 or 50 or 60. The cruelty isn't in any single thing. It's not the cold or the poverty or the work that costs more than it pays. These things are real and they're bad, but they're not the specific cruelty. The specific cruelty is the invisibility. When you were strong, when you were 49 and hauling iron and the furnaces ran hot and you were a worker, a producer, a man who made things, you were visible. You counted. The economy saw you. The street saw you. People made way. Now you're 72 because it's February now and your birthday was January 14th, which passed without ceremony because there was no one in the city who knew the date. You're 72. and you move carefully on icy streets, and the city flows around you without friction, the way water flows round a stone that has stopped being in the way. The boy running doesn't see you. The woman shaking the rug doesn't see you. You step to the side to let the freight wagon past, and the driver's eyes pass over you without pause, landing on nothing. This is what it is. This is the particular loneliness of it. Not the absence of company, but the absence of consequence. The feeling that your presence or absence in a given place matters to no one currently occupying that place. You walk, and then you stop walking, on a corner in the middle of Cincinnati, because something has happened in your chest that isn't grief and isn't rage and is something older than either. A pure, clear note of refusal. Not refusal of the situation, not refusal of the facts, just the small, stubborn insistence of a self on its own existence. I am here, not said out loud. No one would hear it if you did, but the internal fact of it, pressing outward against the invisibility like a hand against glass. I am here. I worked 50 years. I built things that are still standing. I knew a woman who was more herself than anyone I've met since. I raised a son who is decent. I came to a city and made a life in it, and the life held until it didn't. And it didn't hold because of things that were beyond my control, not because I failed. I am Elias Whitmore, and I am here. A horse snorts somewhere behind you. You start walking again. Spring comes the way spring always comes to the Ohio Valley. Not gently, not with the gradual warming of climates that know how to transition. It comes in surges. A week of 50-degree weather that tricks the trees into early buds, then a frost that kills the early buds, then warmth again, real warmth, the kind that smells of mud and the river and the particular vegetable promise of things coming back. By April, the Hartwell job has become reliable in the way you needed it to be. Arthur Sims has raised your pay to $1.40. Not with ceremony, just handed you the extra 5 cents one Friday and said nothing, which was the right way to do it. You're not so proud that you can't accept the $1.40, and you're also not so without self-respect that you needed more said about it. The boarding house has shifted slightly in its human composition. The Bauer family has moved. Otto got a better position at a different factory, slightly north, and they found a place closer to it with another room. You miss Lotta. The new residents in their rooms are a young couple who work at the same factory. Quiet, private, eat separately, not unfriendly but not present in the way the Bowers were present. George Stiles's room has a new occupant, a man of about 50 named Aldous, a former printer whose hands shake slightly with what is either the early symptoms of something serious or the residual damage of years working with lead type and the solvents that go with it. He hasn't told you which, and you haven't asked. Delia Marsh is still here. She always seems like she'll be here. She has the quality of a fixed point, needle in hand, the specific gravity of someone who has made a place and stays in it. On the 3rd Saturday of April you write Thomas. You have not written him since October. The letters have been infrequent for 2 years, which is partly his distance and partly his circumstances, and partly a mutual, unspoken agreement not to document how things are going, because documenting how things are going would require both of you to look at it directly, and looking at it directly would necessitate a conversation neither of you is prepared to have. The conversation is, "Come live with us, Father," and the response you've been preparing or not preparing or refusing to prepare for 2 years is, "I can't do that to you," because Thomas's household in Kansas City has 4 people in it. Thomas, his wife Ellen, and 2 children aged 9 and 6. They have a house they're renting, not owning. Thomas works at a machine shop and makes about $8 a week, which in Kansas City in 1880 is enough for the 4 of them and not enough for 5. Ellen is a good woman and you like her, but liking is not the same as imposing, and the imposition of an old man's needs, the space he takes, the care he sometimes requires, the way poverty ages visibly, and proximity to it is not always comfortable. This is something you have been unwilling to do. You're also aware that this unwillingness is partly pride and partly genuine consideration, and you're not entirely sure where the line between them is. You write the letter. Not the letter about coming to Kansas City. Not that letter. Not yet. A letter about the winter, about the Hartwell job, about George Stiles. You tell him about George Stiles briefly, about April coming, about the river. You tell him the truth, which is that you are managing. You don't tell him the rest of the truth, which is that managing is a word that contains a lot of things you don't have words for. You fold the letter, you address it, you put it in your coat pocket to mail on Monday. His reply comes 3 weeks later. It's a long letter for Thomas, who is not a natural correspondent. 3 pages, close written, the handwriting of a man who went to school long enough to be literate and not long enough to be elegant. He talks about the children. He talks about the machine shop. He talks about Kansas City, which has grown fast, which has the energy of a place that knows it's becoming something. And then, at the end of the 2nd page, Father, Ellen and I have been talking. We want you to come here. I mean it this time. I know I've mentioned it before and you've always said you're fine, but I want you to hear me clearly now. We have a room. It's small. It won't be private the way you're used to. But it's warm and there's always food, and the children would like knowing their grandfather. I am your son. This is what sons are for. Please come. You read this 3 times. You fold the letter. You put it on the small table by the cot. You sit on the edge of the cot and look at the narrow window and the slice of blue April sky visible through it. I am your son. This is what sons are for. Margaret would say, go. She'd say it without hesitation, without the elaborate internal negotiation you'd subject the question to. She'd say it the way she made most decisions, directly, with a clear eye for what was actually happening versus what you wanted to be happening, without the sentimentality that makes men confuse stubbornness with dignity. Go, Elias. Go to Thomas. Stop being a fool about it. You sit with the letter for a long time. On a Sunday in mid-April you walk to Eden Park. You've been putting it off. No particular reason, or too many reasons to single one out. The Hartwell work keeps you indoors most days. Sundays you've been spending doing the small domestic maintenance that keeps a man's circumstances from visibly deteriorating, mending, cleaning, writing letters. But this Sunday the air has a quality you haven't felt since last October. Warm, with a wind off the river that carries green in it. Something botanical and alive, and you find yourself with your coat over your arm and your hat in your hand, walking east on Macmillan Street toward the high ground. Eden Park sits on a bluff on the east side of the city, about 200 feet above the river. It's a public park, new, relatively speaking, laid out in the 1860s on land that used to be a reservoir property, with winding paths and formal plantings and, in certain seasons, in certain weather, a view of the Ohio Valley that opens like a door in the air. This is the view Margaret loved. She walked up here every April, almost without fail, from their time on McMicken Avenue. That was a longer walk, but she made it, in her good Sunday shoes, and she'd stand at the overlook on the eastern edge of the bluff and look at the river valley and the Kentucky hills beyond, and she'd say the same thing she always said, which was nothing for about 5 minutes, and then she'd say, "Well, there it still is." And you'd say, "There it still is," and you'd walk back down. The path up to the bluff is steeper than you'd like it to be this April, but your legs are in better condition than they were in December. The Hartwell work doesn't help your legs, but the daily walk in to and from Broadway does, and something in the regularity of the spring weather has returned a degree of resilience to your body that February had denied it. You stop twice on the way up. Not from necessity, you can keep going, but from the choice to stop, to stand still and let the place be what it is. The trees are coming into leaf, the maples and the oaks, a particular tender green that only lasts about 2 weeks in April before it darkens into the full heavy green of summer. Robins in the underbrush, going about their own insistent business. The smell of wet earth from a recent rain, rich and almost sweet. The smell of the year starting over. You reach the overlook, Cincinnati from above. You've seen it from here before, but the view always requires a moment of reorientation. The mind's map of the city from the street, all close and specific, doesn't match this version, the broad overhead version, the one that shows you the shape of the thing. The Ohio curves through the bottom of the frame, broad and silver in the afternoon sun. The bridges, the suspension bridge, the great John Roebling Bridge that's been there since 1867, its cables arcing between the towers like a theorem made physical. You can see it from here, small and precise, carrying its constant traffic between Ohio and Kentucky. Beyond the river, the Kentucky hills, the city itself spreads up from the waterfront in every direction, layer after layer of streets and buildings climbing the hills that ring the valley. From up here you can see the spires, at least a dozen church steeples visible, each one marking a different congregation, a different community, a different arrangement with God or with the people who share that corner of the city. The courthouse on Main Street, its dome catching the afternoon light. The smokestack of the soap works, tall and thin, currently idle on a Sunday. Dozens of smaller stacks from the factories and foundries that ring the industrial districts, all breathing their smoke straight up in the still air. 22 years. You came to this city when Buchanan was president. You've watched it grow. Watched it at the suspension bridge and the new post office and the music hall, which opened 2 years ago with a concert that you attended in your good coat. One of the last times you wore the good coat to anything, standing in the back of the hall with the sounds of the orchestra filling the whole enormous space and feeling for about an hour that the city you lived in was unambiguously magnificent. You've also watched it do the things cities do that are not magnificent. Watched the panic of 73 empty the ironworks. Watched men sleep in the park shelters on cold nights. Watched the poverty that lives in the alleys behind the grand commercial streets, visible if you know to look, invisible if you'd prefer not to. Both things. The music hall and the potter's field, the suspension bridge and George Stiles's numbered wooden stake. Both things, at the same time in the same place. That's the city. That's all cities. That's the whole argument. You think about Thomas's letter. Please come. The view doesn't answer the question. The river doesn't have an opinion. The Kentucky hills are purely indifferent. But you think about the room Thomas described. Small, not private. Warm. Food at regular intervals. The sound of children who would be his grandchildren, who are 9 and 6 and will. in the way of children, ask him direct questions at unpredictable moments, and demand answers that are honest. You think about Margaret's voice. Go, Elias, stop being a fool. You think about 64 cents and 11 days. You think about pulling a coal cart up a hill in the dark cold of December, your hands going past feeling and into that other territory. You think about sitting beside George Stiles while February pressed against the window and the lamp held its small warm circle against the dark. You're not defeated. You want to be clear about this. This is not defeat. The man standing on this bluff looking at the river valley below, this man is not broken. His hands still work in the cold and limited way they work. His mind is clear. His judgment is, he believes, sound. He has maintained himself in a city that does not make maintenance easy for several years, on resources that were not sufficient and were made sufficient by the daily labour of invention and endurance. He is not defeated, but he is, what? Tired. Tired in the deep way that isn't addressed by sleep. The tiredness that accumulates in layers over years, the tiredness of a body that has done more than it was designed to do, and kept the accounts meticulously, but can feel the sum now in every cold morning, and every hill, and every long evening at the boarding-house window. And Thomas is his son, and his son wants him to come. Well, you say out loud, to no one, to the view, to Margaret wherever she is. There it still is. The river, the bridges, the city you built things in, and that ground you down, and that held you and failed you, and is still, 22 years later, right here, going about its business in the April light. You stand there a long time. When you finally turn and start back down the path, something has shifted in you that you couldn't name precisely but can feel in the quality of the next step. Slightly different. A direction. Not yet a decision, but pointing somewhere specific. The way the sun moves. Not something you choose, but something happening undeniably, whether or not you watch it. You walk back down the hill. That evening, at the hallway stove while your mush is cooking, you think about what to write back to Thomas. Not the words exactly. The words will come when the pen is in your hand, the way they always do, the way anything practiced comes. But the shape of it, what you're actually going to say, the thing you haven't let yourself say until this afternoon. Yes, not forever maybe, not a surrender. What would Thomas say? A visit, an extended visit. You'll come in June when the travel is easier, when the Ohio is fully open and the train runs reliably, and the matter of moving yourself and your trunk and your 3 good books and the things that remain of a life lived in this city can be accomplished without the added complexity of winter. You'll come in June. You'll see how it is. If it's good, you'll stay. If the room is too small, if Ellen is different than you remember, if the children are overwhelming in the way children sometimes are when you encounter them at 72 rather than at 40, then you'll see. But you'll go. The mush starts to thicken. You stir it. Delia Marsh comes up the stairs with her sewing basket and her needle case and nods at you as she passes. The nod of a woman who has learned to communicate efficiently in small gestures. You nod back. Spring, you say. She stops, looks at you. There's something in her expression, something that's been there for weeks, you realise, in the sideways way you notice things you haven't been looking at directly. You're leaving, she says, not a question. June, you say, my son. She nods again. A different nod this time. The kind that acknowledges something more than just the information. Good, she says. You'll manage, you say. I'll manage. The driest possible tone, which is also somehow warm. I've been managing since before you got here. You have. She goes to her room. You take your mush off the stove and stand at the window while the street below does its evening things. A lamplighter moving methodically from post to post. A horse and cart going slow, the horse knowing its route so well it barely needs direction. Children called in from somewhere. A mother's voice cutting through the evening air with a particular carrying quality of necessity. The mush is good tonight. Better than usual somehow. The same ingredients you always use, but tasting this evening of something. Not richness. Sufficiency. The specific flavour of things being on balance and taking everything together. Enough. The attic room. You come to it at 9 o'clock later than usual because the evening stretched itself out the way evenings do in April. The light lasting longer, the temperature cooperative, the reluctance to go inside being, for the first time in months, simply pleasant rather than loaded with everything winter loaded it with. The room is warmer than it was in December. This is the same room, same narrow cot, same chair, same trunk in the corner with the lock that sticks until you lift and turn simultaneously. The same window with its slice of sky. But the room in April is a different proposition than the room in December. The cold is gone from the walls. The frost at the baseboard is gone. The quality of the dark is different, softer somehow, the winter dark having a harshness to it that spring dark doesn't. You sit on the edge of the cot, take off your boots, your feet are dry tonight, the left boot sealed up fine, the cobbler's work holding. You flex your toes. A smaller version of the morning hand ritual, the same checking, same patient inventory. Everything reporting in, present, functional, a little tired, you lie back. The sounds of the city at night in April are different from December's sounds. The taverns are louder, warmer weather bringing people out, keeping them out later. Somewhere several blocks away, music. A fiddle. Something quick and unidentifiable at this distance. Just the rhythm of it travelling through the spring air. A dog, then another dog responding, then silence. The horse car on Vine Street going north, its bell ringing once for the stop. These sounds have been the backdrop of your nights for 3 years. You know them the way you know a particular piece of iron sound. The specific resonance, the overtones, the way it tells you things without having to be asked. The city at night telling you still here, still running, still going. You think about where you've been. Not the geography, not Lancaster and Pittsburgh and Cincinnati and soon Kansas City, but the territory of the thing. The internal landscape of being a man who worked in iron and married a woman who managed everything efficiently, and raised a son who turned out decent and watched the country make a promise, and watched the promise not quite keep itself and kept going anyway, because the going was the thing, the only thing, the thing that was always yours regardless of what the economy did or what the banks did or what the December cold decided about your hands. The furnaces ran at 2,000 degrees. You can still feel it if you want to. The specific heat of being close to that kind of fire, the way it pressed on your face like a hand, the way it made your eyes ache and your leather apron stiff and the air around you shimmer. Iron pulled glowing from the furnace, orange and moving like something alive in the tongs. The sound of the hammer on the iron, the specific ring of it, a sound that is hard to describe to someone who hasn't heard it, not just loud but full, resonant, carrying a kind of authority. That was your life. That specific sound was a significant portion of your life. It was worth something. It is still worth something even now, in an attic room in April, even with the arithmetic of what's left in the cloth wrap being what it is. The work was real. The iron you worked is still in the world somewhere, in bridges and rails and fittings and the frames of buildings you've walked past without knowing, carrying weight, holding things up, doing the work iron does. You made things. Nobody can audit you on that. The fiddle music stops somewhere in the middle of the thought. The dog is quiet. The horse car has gone north and will come back south in about 20 minutes. But for now, the street is what the street sounds like when Cincinnati is thinking rather than talking. A low ongoing murmur, the breathing of a city at rest, the small sounds of 500,000 people settling into the night. Your hands on your chest. You flex them once, slowly, the knuckles moving against the blanket, not testing exactly, not the morning inventory, something more like acknowledgement. These hands, what they've done, what they still do, what they'll do tomorrow and the day after at the Hartwell table, checking manifests, tracking weights, keeping the record of what moves and where it goes, not iron, but useful. Still useful. You're going to Kansas City in June. You're going to arrive at your son's house with your trunk and your 3 books and the things that are left of a life. And you're going to knock on the door and Thomas is going to open it. And he's going to look the way people look when the thing they've been hoping for actually happens. A little surprised, a little moved, trying not to show the moved part. And Ellen will have food on the table, and the children, 9 and 6, he said, names are James and Clara, will look at you from a cautious distance until they decide you're trustworthy, which children always decide eventually if you're patient and you mean it. And the room will be small, and there will be sounds you're not used to, the sounds of a family around you, which are different from the sounds of a boarding house. Less anonymous, more demanding, more present, and it will be an adjustment, and you will make the adjustment because you have been making adjustments for 72 years, and this one is made with love, which is a different kind of material than most of what you've worked with, and a better one. The window in the attic room shows a strip of sky that is tonight actually clear. Stars, not many. The city smoke, even in April, filters the sky. But some. A handful of them, the bright ones that can push through, the ones that have been there so long that no amount of industrial pollution has been able to convince them to go. You look at them without thinking about them, just the old simple fact of them. People have been looking at those particular configurations for longer than any version of America has existed, longer than any city. The stars above Lancaster, Pennsylvania in 1808, the stars above Pittsburgh, the stars above the Ohio River, which ran where it runs before anyone put a city beside it, which will run where it runs long after the city is different from what it is now. Some things move very slowly. Your breathing slows. The fiddle started again, somewhere, faint now. Maybe it was always this faint and you only heard it clearly before because you were listening. A slow air, something in a minor key, something old sounding, the kind of tune that sounds like it came from somewhere sad and made peace with the sadness and turned it into something you could dance to if the mood was right. It's a good sound. The body settles, you're back against the mattress. Your hands quiet now. No flexing, no inventory, just lying still on your chest with the patient dignity of hands that have earned their rest. The left shoulder, with its long memory of iron, finding the mattress and letting the mattress take the weight. The right knee, which has had opinions about everything since 1867 going finally silent. The thoughts slow, not gone, still there, still turning, the way the water turns in the eddies behind the bridge piers, but slow. The letter to Thomas. The view from Eden Park. Lotta Bauer's laugh at the Christmas table. George Stiles's hand, cold in yours. The long breath and then the longer silence. Margaret's voice telling you to stop being a fool. Good counsel. Good, practical, specific counsel. Stop being a fool, Elias. You're not being a fool. Or you're trying not to be. The city breathes around you. Cincinnati in April, in 1880. In a room that smells of the year turning, the musty winter smell giving way to something lighter, something that has the quality of beginning. 500,000 people below you, all of them trying to get through their days, all of them doing the same mathematics in different ways. The arithmetic of what they have and what they need, of who they are and what the world thinks they are, of what they've been promised and what's actually been delivered. All of them with their own sets of hands, their own specific knowledge, their own private stubbornness pressing outward against the things that want to make them small. You are one of them. You are Elias Whitmore, 72 years old, former ironworker, freight manifest clerk, widower, father, resident of the 3rd floor at 214 Vine Street, Cincinnati, Ohio. You came to this city with almost nothing, and you built a life in it, and the life held until parts of it didn't, and you kept going, because keeping going is the thing you know how to do. That's enough. That has always been enough. Let the night come. Let it come the way it comes to everyone, without asking, without warning, just the gradual loosening of the hold that waking keeps on the world. The sounds getting softer, not quieter exactly. The city's still there, still going, but softer, the way distance makes things soft, the way you can hear the same sound from far away, and it's not the sound that changed, but the listening. Let your hands rest. They've done their work today. They'll do more tomorrow. For now, just the weight of them on your chest, warm from the blanket, the knuckles still curved slightly inward but at peace with the curve, not fighting it. Let the stars be there. They'll be there tomorrow. They'll be there in Kansas City in June when you look up at a different piece of sky from a different room. And they'll be the same stars, the same configurations that have been there since before anyone you know had a word for them. Let the river run. The Ohio, running dark and cold in the April night, carrying the snowmelt down from the eastern hills to the Mississippi and then to the Gulf, running where it has always run, holding the city's reflection the way water holds everything, temporarily, perfectly, upside down. Let Thomas's letter be on the table. Let it say what it says in his close, careful handwriting. Please come. This is what sons are for. Let that be true. It is true. You've worked for 50 years in a country that told you one story and gave you another, and you're still here. You built things with your hands that are still standing in this city and cities beyond it, carrying weight that was placed on them decades ago, and that they're still carrying now, in the dark, without complaint. You raised a son who writes letters that say, "Please come." You loved a woman who would tell you bluntly with no sentiment to obscure the instruction, "Stop being a fool. Go to Thomas. You've earned it, and you have. You've earned this rest, and the rest after this, and the morning that comes after that rest, in a boarding house in Cincinnati, or in a small room in Kansas City, or wherever the next iteration of this ongoing project of being Elias Whitmore takes you. You've earned all of it. The strip of sky in the window holds its stars. The minor key fiddle somewhere in the city plays its old, sad, dancing tune. The river runs. You close your eyes. The last thing you hear is the clock on the corner of Viner McMicken striking 10, the sound coming through the open window in slow waves, each wave a little quieter than the last, until you can't tell anymore if you're hearing the clock or remembering it. And then you can't tell the difference between remembering and dreaming. And then there's just the night, and you in it, and the rest of your life, somewhere ahead in the dark, waiting good night